The following program is a sports handicapping show. That's right, we will be discussing sports betting and all kinds of other gambling stuff, including game predictions. As you know, not every bet will win, but we do our best. Feel free to use this information at your own risk, and remember, wager wisely, folks.
Broadcasting from the Vegas Video Network studios, live from the Las Vegas Strip, Covers.com presents Vegas SportsDay. And now from the sports betting capital of the world, here are your hosts, Teddy and the Professor.
It's Thursday in Sin City, and you are watching Vegas SportsDay, the pulse of the sports betting world. I'm your host, Teddy Covers, joined as always by my esteemed colleague, the Professor, Dave Malinsky.
Coming up today, we're going to talk about a breeze that's been blowing through the NFL this year that the markets are still struggling to adjust for. We'll bring up some old gray defenses that ain't what they used to be. And we break it down in money time for one particular team that a walk through the Rose Garden has been producing nothing but thorns.
Dave, first take on a Thursday. What did you see last night that you want to share with our viewing audience?
Something we'll be sharing throughout the course of the show today is how different the NFL was in 2011 and how slow I individually was to react to it. Something that shouldn't have happened. Saw last year when they started to instigate some of those rule changes midway through the season that it became harder and harder for the defenses, especially against the pass. You couldn't hit the quarterbacks as much, couldn't have as much contact with the receivers. Defenses got a little confused, got a little gun shy. So did we follow up the right way and anticipate that this year? No, because we still ended up being molded to those old notions that running the ball and playing defense are those keys to success in that league, and that passing stats can be a little bit flukier. Well, on today's show, we're going to discuss how much of an impact those rule changes have made, the inability of the odds makers to adjust properly, and lament the fact that for our own pockets, we didn't get the job done the right way either. So plenty of food for thought today. Teddy, I'm talking football. You're going to be talking hoops, I think.
Yeah, I am. And I want to talk about what happened on the show yesterday, Dave, because I've been in Las Vegas since 1998. I'm a veteran bettor, let's just put it that way. And yet, I came on the show yesterday, and you said something that was so succinct, so perfect, I felt like I learned something. I felt like I came out of the show like, wow, I hadn't thought of it that way. And what you talked about, we were talking about the Georgetown game. And we'll get to the end of that game in just a moment. But you were talking about Georgetown Marquette, and you said that you want the betting markets to be pricing these games correctly. You want the odds makers to have it nailed because the edge comes not from a bad point spread, but from a point spread that's accurate and your ability to read which teams are going to be able to have a good end game. And Dave, you were spot on. That was really solid analysis, something that, I was like, ooh, a little light bulb went over my head. And if you watched the Georgetown game yesterday, basically everything you said rang true. Georgetown trailed by 17. They had an awful first half. They didn't get their act together until midway through the second. But when it came to the end game of that contest, Georgetown head and shoulders ahead of Marquette. They moved the ball on offense. They hit their shots. They rallied from 17 down to take a 3-point lead. Oh, and then they missed the 2 free throws that would have, we needed 1 to push, 2 to win. Missed them both. Didn't work out the way we would have hoped. But the analysis and the thought process, spot on, Mr. Malinsky. I give you credit.
We'll take that credit away when we get to the NFL part of today's show because we didn't trust our own convictions. Of course, part of it that was being talked about yesterday, and this is kind of important, you can beat a good line with matchups. And the magic in sport, if A is 3 over B and B is 3 over C, that doesn't mean A is 6 over C. Because the styles are different. Well, basketball will be able to take advantage when there's a good line. Part of what we're going to talk about in the NFL in the post-mortem today, the line wasn't always good. We struggled because we weren't able to use that as a base. There were windows of opportunity in pro football this year we did not take proper advantage of. But it's not over yet. Pro football starts again, in about 48 hours.
Yeah, we've got 11 games left in this NFL season, and we plan on taking advantage. So let's get started with Market Watch right here. Now, it is wild card weekend, obviously, in the NFL. So before we get into the nuances of the individual matchups, let's take a look at how the betting patterns have held up through the years. Last year, a perfect 4-0 for underdogs in this round. The full record since 1978 now, 57, 45, and 3. There was one game that went off as a pick'em that we're not going to count, but bottom line is, if you bet every underdog in the first round of the playoffs for the last 30-something years, you made a profit. That's been a money-winning strategy. Note that home dogs in this round have been particularly good, 12-4 ATS, although we don't see, we got one home dog this week. That's Denver. We won't discuss that game till tomorrow. So we know the dogs have been good. We know the home dogs have been good. Dave, how do we incorporate that into our thought process for this weekend?
Got to be a little bit careful with it because there are some assumptions that you could make that aren't necessarily true ones. One of the first things that would come to mind, if the dogs have been good in Wild Card Weekend, it's, you know why? Because the 4 best teams, the teams that have the home field advantages, that have the buys, don't play, so there's a little bit of a scramble factor. Maybe a little bit of degree of truth to that until we look at the way the games themselves have flowed. When you think dogs covering, you think a lot of close games. You think of the point spread mattering. That's not really the case. 106 games in the wild card rounds, 47 of them decided by 14 or more. We've had a lot of blowouts. A lot of times it's been the underdog that's been blowing out the favorite. What you get again is that fragile aspect of playoff football. The reason the games break open in the regular season, if you're down big in the third quarter, you keep competing because you know you got to come back again next week. You stay in structure. You get down big in the playoffs, you know your season's over. A lot of times these teams just don't compete in the fourth quarter. When a blowout happens, they tend to snowball instead of coming back in. So we want to look a little bit for some of those underdogs that have the ability to win outright. And when we think we find them, don't be afraid to play the money line. Turns out that in those settings, if you believe your idea is right, the money line may offer you a better return than taking the points as a cushion.
And that segues perfectly into a great email question we got just about an hour ago. I wanted to incorporate it into today's show. It was from AT, and he's asking about Super Bowl futures. He wants to know what teams we think are alive when it comes to the current Super Bowl odds. And AT, my strategy towards futures has very little to do with future books. If there's a team, particularly an underdog, one of the long shots that I like come postseason time, I'm not going to bet them on the future board. I'm going to bet them on the money line every single game. And if you watch what happens with the rate of return, if you bet an underdog, I don't know, let's say the Lions. Let's say, just for example, if you were looking at the Lions as being a live team and you wanted to bet the Lions. If you bet the Lions on the money line in every game, you're going to make more money, significantly more money, than you will if you bet the Lions in the future book. Same story with other long shots like the Broncos or the Falcons or the Giants. Any of these teams, except for the favorites, you can get a better rate of return simply taking your initial investment and rolling it over every week on that same squad. It also gives you the edge. You don't have to hedge if they get to the Super Bowl or to the championship game. You can just take your money and put it in your pocket. And that gives you a way to win even if that team doesn't go on to win the Super Bowl. So I tend to like the money lines, and you're essentially parlaying them together, 1 week after the next after the next. That's the strategy that I found to be most profitable toward the postseason. It doesn't work, however, if you want to bet the favorites, but same story with the favorites. If you want to bet the Patriots at 2-1 or the Packers at 2-1 or the odds that you're getting on the favorites, you're not getting a reasonable rate of return on those. True odds, much better for the dogs, and the best way to cash in for the dogs and the long shots is on the money line. But the question, Dave, from AT asked about specific teams. You have any specific teams you want to mention?
Right now, we have to talk about the New Orleans Saints, and we will again, of course, in money time, a team that's playing as well as anyone. They talk about the fact that they've been so good in the Superdome this year, and they've just been dynamite. But can they go to San Francisco and win? Yes, they can, because they've got a lot more weapons than the 49ers have. But here's the real key. Can they go to Green Bay and win? One of the things the Packers did helped their passing game through all these years, but doesn't make the home field advantage what it used to be, is that very expensive heating system at Lambeau Field. No matter how cold it is, or even if it's snowing at Lambeau in late January, that field's going to be in perfect condition. So their home advantage isn't as good as it used to be. So the Saints do have the ability to go out there and win on the road. They're just playing a little bit better than everyone else. When we look at the other seeded teams that have the buys, the 49ers, no playoff experience, a little bit limited in terms of personnel. The Packers, very, very bad on defense this year. The Patriots, struggling badly on defense. The Ravens never really kicked it in on either side of the ball. So we don't see a play-on team out there anywhere, except possibly for the Saints. They're the only ones that would get us interested right now if we could find a good price.
Keep those emails coming. Remember, this is your show. We're going to answer as many emails as we can on air on a daily basis. So send them in, sportsday@covers.com. That's the email address again, sportsday@covers.com. You can follow us on Twitter, @VegasSportsDay. That's one word. And of course, if you're not involved in the community, you should be. There's so many others like us, like you, who are betting on a daily basis. Get involved. Active threads and discussions going right now, covers.com/posting forum.
When we come back, the scalpels are going to be a little extra sharp. We're going to do the entire NFL season in the postmortem. You're watching Vegas Sports Day.
Are you looking for the latest odds, the fastest scores, the most important trends, and the best matchups and stats? Are you looking for the key late-breaking information that can make you a winner? Well, Covers.com has the answer. The world's largest sports betting community gives you a front row seat in the heart of the action, from the opening lines to the final scores. If you want to stay ahead of the game, Covers covers the numbers.
Hi, I'm Chris Phillips from Talk Tales, and you're watching the Vegas Video Network. And if you stop by the studio, our producer Scott's going to buy everybody a drink.
Okay, guys, time to scrub up. Today in the postmortem, we're going to cut open the entire NFL season. So make sure you got your shoes covered. We don't want any blood to splatter.
We're going to start talking about the NFL playoffs today, but our focus may be a little bit different than in the past. It needs to be. This was also a different sport than it was in the past. It sure looked like Drew Brees was a step ahead of the defenses all season, and in fact he was. A combination of the rules changes making it more difficult to both rush the passer and make contact downfield to separate receivers from the ball has truly made the NFL a passing fancy. So to better project what's going to happen the next couple of weeks, let's go back and better understand exactly what happened this season. Running the football and defense wins championships, right, Dave?
Not this year. Unlikely to be the case. So many different interesting elements we'll be able to talk about. We brought up on the show a few times already that Green Bay and New England, the number one seeds in each conference, happen to have the worst defenses in those two conferences. Never happened before. Unlikely to ever see it happen again. But today we're going to focus on the passing game. 4 teams this year finished with passer ratings of better than 100. Over the past 5 seasons, only 10 had done that. Literally double the amount of teams that had done that before. When we break down most seasons, though, we go into what we call the top 8 in the 4 base categories. That would be the upper 25% of the league. Passer efficiency on offense and defense both. Use that. Don't use total passing yards. Passer efficiency, a much better rating. And then, of course, the net rushing yards. Use that both for offense and defense. When we break it down this year, it's fascinating. So let's take a look at the tables and show you the correlations with winning in those key categories. The top 8 teams in passing efficiency, they went 91-37. The top 8 teams in running the ball, they only went 69-59. Major difference in the impact for how passing was able to overshadow running this year. Now, of course, that's again what happened on the scoreboard. Our job isn't just the scoreboard, it's to go down the street and beat the sports books or the janitor out in the hall who is collecting from me after the bowls the last couple of days. Didn't play out terribly well. Did the markets adjust properly for the fact that the correlation for passing was so much stronger? Because you saw that number, 91-37. The previous year, the top 8 passing teams, they were only 83-45. There's an 8-game difference. The previous year, the top 8 rushing teams, 73-55. There was a big change this year. Did the markets read it?
Nah, not necessarily. They should have been reading it, one would think. Passing picked up in a major way last year when the rules changes took place in the middle of that 2010 season and finished with an average of 221.3 passing yards per team. That was an NFL record at the time. Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees. Isn't that where the public money goes? Don't those teams, or aren't they supposed to lose value? When the best quarterbacks are also playing for the best teams, the teams that are the preseason favorites to win it all, doesn't the lines maker and the betting markets figure it out from the start? Perhaps not. Didn't happen this year. The teams that passed the ball won the games, no question. We just saw that with the graphic that Jacob just put up for us. And that can be expected. But look at how these teams dominated against the point spread. Those 8 teams, 79, 46, and 3 against the spread, despite the fact that 7 of the 8 made the playoffs, and most of them were the highest profile teams, the most public teams out there this season. The public bettors won, the wise guys lost. That means not only were the odds makers slow in recognizing the dominance of the passing teams under the new rules, but the betting markets, the bettors, the sharpest bettors, weren't taking advantage to the point that the odds makers would have to make adjustments themselves. Just didn't happen.
So how extreme was this year? Let's set a perspective and let's take some of these numbers and look at how they matched up throughout the history of the NFL. Let's start with passer rating, 72.5 this year. That's number 1 all time. Passing yards per game, 459.5. That's number 1 all time. 6.3 net yards per pass. That's number 1 all time. Now, when we talk about that particular set, that's including sacks because we thought that was important. Yet with all these passes being thrown, the interception rate, 2.9%, that's the second lowest ever. Teams were actually able to throw the ball at a remarkable efficiency level this year. We didn't anticipate it well, neither did the odds makers. Part of our reliance upon the odds makers got us into a little bit of trouble. So now it becomes playoff time. And as we take all this and incorporate it, what are the final lessons we can draw from it?
All right, you're saying, yeah, it's not all rule changes. This is the era of Brees and Brady and Rodgers. I'm not so sure that that's the case. This is also a league in which there were some awfully weak quarterbacks this year. Like every year, 4 different rookies had enough attempts to qualify for the leaderboard. We had Curtis Painter. We had Tyler Palko. And if you watch any Tyler Palko, you know what I'm talking about. Caleb Haney, inept. Josh Bartell, you can go on. Luke McCown got starts. Kyle Bowler got starts. Rex Grossman was a starting quarterback for a team for most of the year. John Beck, A.J. Feely, on and on down the line. Lots of bad quarterbacks. Lots of bad quarterbacks taking shots downfield, and yet still ended up with the highest passing numbers of all time in multiple categories. Think what would have happened if Peyton Manning had been healthy this year, or if Jay Cutler had stayed healthy for the final 6 games. The numbers would have been even higher than they were, even with all those garbage QBs getting playing time. So if the regular season played to a new extreme, the playoffs, well, we have to take a little bit of a different focus, no question. We'll be doing that in our final Money Time segment today when we break down Saturday's games.
But it's not time for football yet. There's money to be made on the Thursday night hardwoods, and that's where our focus goes when we come back. You're watching Vegas Sports Day.
This is David Ivey from Pub Crawl. It's funny because this is David from. You should just leave it on. Hi, I'm David Ivey from Pub Crawl, and you're watching the Vegas Video Network. And scene.
Livestream is your premier place to watch live events on the web, mobile devices, and connected TVs. See new events daily or broadcast your own at livestream.com. Livestream. Be there.
All right, guys, it's money time. This edition of Money Time is brought to you by Covers.com. Remember, for all the key information you need in every sport, Covers covers the numbers. Let's start in San Antonio this evening, where the Spurs -1.5 against the defending champion Dallas Mavericks. And we saw San Antonio in a barn burner last night, rallied from behind in the fourth quarter. Man, they were on fire down the stretch in that ballgame. If you watched it, you know what I'm talking about. Monta Ellis, who played incredibly well. It really carried the Warriors for extended stretches after Stephon Curry got hurt. And the fourth quarter of that game, Ellis is just shaking his head. Oh, I can't believe what just happened. How did Tony Parker beat me again? Spurs nailed everything. Can they do it 2 nights in a row here against the defending champs, Dave?
Some big questions here. Now, we talked about this a little bit on their Insider Six-Pack yesterday, referring to the Manu Ginobili injury. Preview and review these San Antonio games very carefully. Greg Popovich is going to do some things that might look a little bit off the wall in the weeks ahead. He's going to play every game hard in the first half. There are games where they fall behind and they don't think they have a chance. He's going to back off. We saw that when he pulled Tim Duncan out for the entire second half against Houston earlier. Second game of back-to-back nights, this could be a prime setting for that. But another little wild card element thrown in there last night that we didn't expect might have been the single key to turning that game around. Tony Parker and TJ Ford on the court at the same time in the fourth quarter. That ignited an 11-2 spurt that put them in the lead against Golden State. That's an interesting combination. Now, it's a very small one. It's not a very good one defensively. But look at the difficulty that he can use if he wants to throw that at the Mavericks tonight. The Maverick backcourt, a lot of times it's going to be that trio, Jason Kidd, Vince Carter. You're going to have Terry off the bench. They're older. They don't want to do a lot of chasing. We might see some wide open elements there. Is it possible that Popovich might like to win speeding the tempo tonight instead of relying on defense? Because that's one of the real keys here. As we alluded to in the opening tease, these two defenses that had been so good last year, boy, they look old and slow. Dallas, number 7 in the league last year, currently number 20. San Antonio, number 11 last year, currently playing at number 21. Could we see Pops continue in the early stages tonight with the way he won in the late stages last night?
Yeah, I mean, San Antonio on the second night of back-to-backs is not a team I'm going to be looking to get involved with very often, certainly not with a wager on the Spurs. If you're looking to bet on San Antonio in this type of game, maybe you look at a first-half wager because we've seen it so many times in the NBA already. The season's, 2 weeks old? And we're seeing the same pattern again and again. Veteran team, second night of back-to-backs, not coming through with the same effort in the second half. We saw San Antonio and Popovich last time, second night of back-to-backs, where everybody basically made the decision. They were down 20 at the break, down 18 at the break. Duncan will sit for the second half of this game, and they never made a run at all. So to look at the Spurs minus the points, and let's not forget, this series, home court means nothing, absolutely nothing, when San Antonio plays Dallas. Veteran teams that are more than capable of winning on the highway, and we haven't seen any legitimate home field edge, or any home court edge, I should say. So any edge you're factoring in for San Antonio in this one, because they're playing at home, I might negate that a little bit.
Now let's shift focus when it comes to home court edges. Let's go to the Rose Garden in Portland. Portland right now a 3.5-point favorite over the Lakers. Tough place to play for most visitors. When the crowd gets to a crescendo, this is a very tough building, they get to a crescendo when the Lakers come to town. In the Kobe Bryant years, the Lakers are 6-23 on this court. Could have easily been 5-24. Last year, they got a win here where they trailed by 7 with 1:30 left in regulation, stole it, managed to gut it out in overtime. We've only seen the Lakers on the road once so far this year, a game at Denver where they gassed out and faded in the fourth quarter. Are they ready to overcome the Rose Garden tonight against what may be a better Portland team?
Well, the Lakers may have a nice matchup edge here in the front court. We look at Andrew Bynum, who's just been a monster since serving his 4-game suspensions. The numbers, 29 points, 13 boards, 18 points, 16 boards, 21 points, 22 boards in his first 3 games. Those are pretty strong numbers. And when you think about Bynum, and then you think about Pau Gasol, and then you factor in the mix Troy Murphy, who has played very well off the bench for L.A. in the early part of the season, and you match those guys up against the likes of Marcus Camby, who can still defend and rebound, but is no offensive threat, and at times he can get pushed around. You look at LaMarcus Aldridge, who's not really a big bruiser, who's getting big board numbers. And you look at Kurt Thomas off the bench, he's a little bit older. Well, he's a lot older. And you wonder, will L.A. have a big edge in the paint where they're winning the rebounding battle by margin and getting lots of good looks? But for whatever edge L.A. might have in the paint, you talked about the strength of the Rose Garden. The Blazers already 3-0 on this floor this year, and the only game they didn't cover was a really tough beat, a game they led by 16 with about 4 minutes left and ended up winning by only 4, thanks to missed free throws and hot 76ers three-point shooting down the stretch. But It has been a strong home court, and that Kobe Bryant record, again, this is not something from way back in the day. The Lakers have lost 10 of the last 12 on this floor, and they've been in championship contention throughout that run. No question, the Rose Garden has been a house of horrors for the Lakers, both in recent years and dating back quite some time.
Here's what you're going to see if you watch it on TNT tonight, though. You're going to see a Portland chemistry. In the past, we wouldn't have thought that this would have been a great rebounding team because the individual components spent so much of their career playing out of position. Marcus Aldridge had to play the 5 spot a lot. Gerald Wallace, at times in his NBA career, had to play power forward when he was at Charlotte. Now you've got a lot of guys in the right spot, and look at this team chemistry. Who's number 1 in the league in rebounding so far? It's Portland. Who's number 5 in the league in defense so far? It's Portland. Those are very real numbers. The way we projected out 4 of their 5 games are against teams that should make the playoffs. But their last 3 games, against the Clippers, against the Thunder, against the Nuggets, those are 3 teams that are going to be fighting for home court advantages in the Western Conference later in the year. We like this chemistry an awful lot, but maybe the biggest matchup on the court is one Portland wins. The Lakers can't stay in front of Raymond Felton. Derek Fisher, little slow, little old. Steve Blake, even when he was younger, didn't have the quickness. Felton off to a really good start this year. Lakers may have a tough time staying in front of him tonight, and he's been dictating that Portland offensive flow.
Let's go to Bloomington, Indiana for a marquee matchup on the college hardwood this evening. The Indiana Hoosiers -7.5 at home against Michigan. And certainly we look at Indiana, this team is battle tested. We've seen them beat Kentucky on this floor. We've seen them beat Ohio State on this floor. We saw them play at Michigan State. So in their last 6 games, they've faced some real elite competition. Same span, Michigan really hasn't played a team with any postseason aspirations. Maybe Minnesota can slip into the NIT, but they're certainly not a team on the Wolverine slate that's been anywhere near as good as the teams that Indiana has faced and beaten 2 of over the past couple of weeks.
We're Indiana believers. They didn't win a lot of games the first couple of years under Tom Crean, but they were playing good basketball. They were hustling. They were scrapping. They were running good stuff. They didn't have the personnel. Now the last 2 recruiting classes put the good personnel on the court, and they've been great classes. Got a lot of good wing players in play last year, and now Tyler Zeller steps in, and he's the real deal inside. Shooting over 64%, averaging in double figures, hitting the boards well, blocking shots. This whole team has a chemistry that's been a lot of fun to watch. So here's where this game gets really interesting. When you look at the talent upgrade that Indiana's had, let's go back to last year's games. Because except for Zeller, the big upgrade for Indiana, Michigan's got 4 of the same 5 starters back. They lost one of their key cogs from last year. Go back and look at those games. There's some fascinating elements. Indiana wins the scoreboard by 15 points over 80 minutes. Only split 1-1. They won big on this court, lost close in Ann Arbor. But look at the rebounding, 65-42. And while a lot of teams struggle to break down John Beilein in that 1-3-1 trapping zone defense, we've never seen anyone, not even the cream of the Big Ten last year, broke it down better than Tom Crean and the Hoosiers did. How about 45 out of 68 on their 2-point shot attempts? That means you're getting a lot of real easy looks at the basket. Michigan a little weak without John Horford in their rotation tonight. It's a chance that what Indiana did last year might be even more extreme this time around.
Yeah, and we just got an email in from Mike DeSillis. Mike, thanks for sending it in. I wanted to mention it specifically on air because asking about this very game. And, Michigan, they have a remarkable point spread track record right now. The Beilein era has gotten better and better for Wolverine supporters. The numbers don't lie. 9-2 against the spread, their last 11 on the road. We have 13-3 against the spread, their last 16 against Big Ten opposition, and 20-6 against the spread in their last 26 line games overall. The betting markets have been way behind the Wolverines throughout the course of this stretch. But given the differential in the point spread in this game between where the number is and where the projected numbers were based on the various power ratings that are out there, looks like the betting market's giving Michigan a heck of a lot of respect here. I don't want the Wolverines in this spot unless I'm catching double digits.
So what's the best we can do on this basketball card? We've got something that's definitely worthy of play of the day status. Portland is better than the Lakers. We like this chemistry an awful lot. They put the pieces together the right way where guys are playing where they naturally fit the best. Portland has held up well against a very tough schedule. Again, the Lakers have had one road game. They went to Denver. When the pressure was on in the fourth quarter, they couldn't get it done because some of their players got locked up. And one of the things we noticed last year, Wesley Matthews, a good physical defender for Portland, got right into Kobe Bryant that early in his career. Look for Portland to control the Lakers tonight, be able to get a win much more comfortable than that point spread is. They're not even giving Portland a full home court tonight. Plenty of value to lay the Trailblazers minus a 3.5.
When we come back, we're going to shift to the gridirons. It's Cotton Bowl time on Friday night. We'll break it down right here on Vegas Sports Day.
Traditional media believes that after about 3 minutes, you'll tune out. Most Vegas media companies think if it doesn't jiggle, you won't tune in. At the Vegas Video Network, we think both are wrong. The Vegas Video Network is the first and only live online broadcast network that specializes in insider news and expert views about Vegas. We combine great storytelling with the ability to watch when and where you want on your computer, mobile device, or television. Discover the real Las Vegas. Visit VegasVideoNetwork.com.
Let's go to the Cotton Bowl on Friday night at Cowboy Stadium in Arlington. Right now, Arkansas about minus 7.5 against Kansas State. Total 62.5. And this is a Kansas State team, incredible character this year, really. They went 8-1 in games decided by a touchdown or less. They stole victories in hostile environment again and again. Just think back to the first one at Miami, a game where they looked to be outmatched. A game where they had to make game-saving plays repeatedly in the fourth quarter, yet they found a way to do it. Stole the win at the Hurricanes, and boy, that sparked a real special season for the Wildcats. But they have to take a big step up in class in this one, don't they, Dave?
There is a snap factor here. Kansas State goes 10-2. They needed bounces to get there. So a lot of times we think about things like character. We think about how well they compete. But they had to have the bounces. They just weren't good enough to get them otherwise. 8 of those 10 wins by 7 points or less. The only wins they got easily, Kansas, Kent State. 2 pretty hapless teams. So what happens now if you don't get the bounces and the rubber band is stretched really, really far? It might snap here. Arkansas has a wonderful ability to do 2 things. Attack aggressively on offense, but also do it in a low-risk way. That's pretty rare that it happens that way, but it's a combination of very good players and Bobby Petrino's playbook. They like to attack deep down the field or very wide to the sidelines. When you stretch the field, you eliminate turnovers because you're not putting the ball where there's a cluster of defenders. None of this little dink and dunk stuff where a tipped pass at the line of scrimmage gets picked off. That doesn't happen with Arkansas. Very low turnover rate. Tyler Wilson, the quarterback, 22 touchdown passes, only 6 interceptions against a very tough schedule. The only quarterback in the nation that had to play LSU and Alabama both on the road. So we could see Arkansas aggressively attacking this Kansas State defense early, maybe setting a tempo that forces Colin Klein, one of our favorite guys. You remember we did a post-mortem about him as one of the unsung MVPs in college football. But he could be forced out of his game. Get Klein down 2 touchdowns where he has to throw instead of running. He doesn't have a whole lot of support.
Yeah, I mean, Klein, for the season, only threw 12 touchdown passes. He had his best success on the ground where he ran for 26 TDs. But you look up and down that K-State roster, not a lot of big-time playmakers. They were a character team, no question, a team that rallied together, a team that banded together and found ways to hang tough and find wins. Sometimes when it comes to bowl season, you say, well, do we throw out the stats? Because there are certainly games where you say, hey, this team's got nothing to do with their stats. That's not the type of team that they were, and they're capable of putting together some special things. It was a special K-State team. On the other hand, when you have a month, 5 weeks off to cool that momentum, and then you take a look at what the matchups really are on the field. I mean, K-State has some defensive issues in this ballgame. This in Arkansas offense, again, they played a Big 12 opponent this year, taking, obviously, as Dave mentioned, a big step down in class after playing all those SEC defenses, including the 2 best defenses in the country on the highway. You know, they played the one game against A&M where they have almost 600 yards in that ballgame, 42 points. They probably could have scored more, but they didn't need to. And Petrino's a blowout guy. When he has the opportunity, he's going to take it to opposing. He's not going to run it up the gut 15 times in a row in the fourth quarter. That's just not the mentality. of this football team. You look at what they've done against teams like Mississippi State, South Carolina, Auburn, all three of whom won their bowl games, and Arkansas annihilated all of those teams by double-digit margins.
When we come back, the National Football League playoffs begin on Vegas Sports Day.
Hey, I'm Al, man. Is that how you get them to do that all the time? Just sit there and be an ass. Is that it? Hey, I'm Al. Hey, I'm Al Mancini at Top of the Food Chain. You are watching the Vegas Video Network. We got big forks, big spoons. I got a big mouth. I got no guests.
All right, it's NFL playoff time. Let's start in Houston, where the Texans, making their first ever playoff appearance, -3 at home against the Cincinnati Bengals, total 38.5. It's a Houston team coming into the postseason on a 3-game losing skid. They have issues at quarterback. They have injuries all over the place. And yet, they're still 3 points better than Cincinnati, according to the betting markets. Dave, do you agree?
They're probably more than 3 points better if we look over the course of the entire season. Let's go to one interesting element of this. When we did our postmortem, we talked about those 4 key categories: passer efficiency, offense and defense, rushing, offense and defense. Houston was the only team in the NFL that finished in the top 8 in all 4 of those categories. The Bengals, the only team in the playoffs that didn't finish in the top 8 in any of them. That shows you the gap that existed over the course of the season. Now, Houston stumbled late because they were allowed to. They had the playoffs clinched pretty early. The Bengals had to keep playing hard all the way through the season. Their wild card hopes were literally going down to the final weekend of the season. How did Cincinnati do when they had to step up this year against playoff teams? Not very well. 0-7 straight up, 1-5-1 against the spread. There's that perfect correlation in their schedule. 9-0 against losing teams, 0-7 against winning teams. So why is the line so short? The perception that Houston lost momentum. But you know what? They're healthy now, because as good as those numbers were, we talk about being in the top 4 or top 8 in those categories. Arian Foster didn't play all 16 games. Andre Johnson didn't play all 16 games. They're out there healthy now. Yeah, you lose from Matt Schaub to Yates at quarterback. But guess what? Yates had a better passer rating than Andy Dalton. We're not going to say Yates is better than Dalton. In the future, he will not prove to be. But if he plays Dalton anywhere near a standoff, it just looks like Houston is better almost everywhere else. And I think we kind of saw that when they went head-to-head in Cincinnati a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, Dave, and one thing that I like to focus on a lot when it comes to postseason matchups, you want to know exactly what happened in the first games. You want to know the situations that the two teams were in. You want to know the motivation levels that they had. Was it a flat spot? Was it a hot spot? And how they play against one another. And when Cincinnati played Houston the first time, the Bengals were trying, and Houston was trying. It was an A game for both teams. Cincinnati in a tough fight to clinch a playoff spot, and for Houston, they needed to win that game to clinch their first ever division title, and they got the win. Again, it took a late rally. They won 20-19 in that ball game, but the stats speak a little bit of a different story. The Texans were -2 in turnovers. They won the game outright as a dog on the road. That doesn't happen very often. They had 25-16 first down advantage. They were able to move the football against that vaunted Bengals defense. They were able to do it on the ground. And total yardage, 412 to 285. That's a nearly 2-to-1 edge, or sorry, nearly 3-to-2 edge for Houston in that ball game. And that came despite playing a rookie quarterback who I believe it might have been his second road start at the time. He certainly didn't have a lot of experience in hostile environments. And they didn't have Andre Johnson in that ball game, a guy who they will have this coming Saturday.
New Orleans is the football capital of the world for the next couple of days. Saints open the playoff Saturday, LSU Bama Monday night. Let's start with the Saints first. Right now, about a 10.5-point favorite. Total around 59 over Detroit. Boy, has the Superdome been special for New Orleans this year. Arguably the best home season in NFL history. 8-0 straight up and against the point spread. But they beat the spread by 126 points. The oddsmakers weren't even close. As we alluded to in the postmortem about how sometimes if the oddsmakers aren't on, it takes away one of the base elements that we'd like to rely on. They weren't even close in these New Orleans home games. Saints averaged 41.1 points per game at home. Can Detroit do much about that?
Well, again, let's talk about what happened in the first meeting between these two teams on this field, about a month ago. Saints won that game 31-17. played out all New Orleans in the first half of that ballgame. They were up 17-0 at the break, kind of took it to the Lions early. Detroit maybe a little bit shell-shocked by what Drew Brees was doing on that side of the football. But the Lions came back and made a game of it. 24-17 in the fourth quarter until New Orleans scored one last time to get the win and cover by 2 touchdowns. Jason Hanson missed a couple of field goals, and that's such a momentum killer. Anytime a team, especially against a team like New Orleans, where you drive down the field, get into range to score, and your kicker can't bring it home. The two teams combined the two teams each had 4 punts in that ballgame. To give you an idea of how the offenses were moving, it wasn't like the Saints were able to move the ball in a way that Detroit couldn't. They just better took advantage of their opportunities, which is something that when you have Drew Brees and all the weapons New Orleans has, you can better take advantage of those opportunities. Worth noting, the Lions 11 penalties in that ballgame, New Orleans only 3, and that was a huge factor because Detroit's defense, they've been getting flagged all year, and you can expect there are going to be a handful of flags in this one. Detroit has that dirty reputation, and the Saints, you can't beat them if you don't commit at least some atrocities for penalties. Strength of schedule is also worth noting a little bit here. We have the Saints in terms of playoff teams they face. They played the Packers on opening day and lost. They played Atlanta twice. One game came very tight. The other game, a blowout win. Then they had the Giants and the Lions. That's the only playoff teams that they faced all years. I think Detroit played a much tougher schedule when we look at San Francisco, Atlanta. They had to play the Bears twice when Chicago was good with Jay Cutler and Matt Forte healthy for both of those ball games. They had Green Bay twice. They had the Saints. And even though they didn't make the playoffs, those 2 late season games against Oakland and San Diego, certainly playoff caliber opposition and playoff intensity type ball games.
If there's an advantage Detroit has that they didn't have the first time around, you get Sue and Delmas back on defense, 2 guys with Pro Bowl type talent. That makes a big difference here. Problem is, even at what looks like a high line, we're not in any particular hurry. A lot of times on this show, we're going to refer to a team as a tough out on the road. There are specific things you look for when backing a road underdog. Team that plays with poise, team that's solid defensively, can slow the tempo a little bit, do the things that sort of slog a game down a little bit. Detroit brings none of that. They'll speed it up on offense. They're going to be wide open and they're going to throw. Will they keep their poise if they get behind? No guarantee. The top of the show, when we talk about it, a lot of times these games will snap open because the team knows their season is over. You can see Detroit guys pouting in the fourth quarter. So there's some elements that make it difficult to back them. The other thing we're also a little bit uneasy about, Matt Stafford's numbers against blitzes this year were substantially weaker than when teams didn't blitz. Yes, he just didn't see a lot of blitzes. When you blitz Detroit, you're leaving a one-on-one coverage against Calvin Johnson. Nobody wants to do that. New Orleans blitzes more than anyone in the NFL. They didn't blitz as much the first time around. They sacked Stafford 3 times. They were a little cautious also about leaving Johnson in one-on-one coverage. But don't be surprised on a second look. In a relatively short period of time, Greg Williams dials up a whole lot more blitzes, adds the potential for more mistakes, a little more volatility out there. Yeah, double figures with a good team is often pretty attractive to take that dog to hang in. I don't know if Detroit brings those elements. I don't know if we can trust the Lions to play hard or smart for the full 60 minutes.
It's play of the day time, and what do we have? We're going to take our shot on Saturday with Houston, the Texans, -3 at home against Cincinnati. That looks like the best of Saturday's NFL board. We're going to take advantage. Houston -3. This is not one you want to wait on. We've seen money steady trickle come in on the Texans over the course of the last 48 hours or so. That may continue. Get the 3s while they're still out there. Texans minus a spot. That's a Vegas Sports Day play of the day. And that's going to wrap it up for the Thursday edition. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to spend with us. For Malinsky, I'm Savransky. Enjoy the games and good luck. We'll see you again tomorrow.